The mountain had no name in the tongue of men, but the angels called it Ardis, and they spoke the word the way the dying speak the names of those they have loved, with reverence, with sorrow, and with the shame of those who know they have chosen ruin with open eyes. It was here on the flat crown of stone where the wind moved like a living thing that Semjaza stood on the night everything changed. Below him, spread across the valley like embers cooling after a great fire, were the lights of the settlements of men, small fires, human fires, and he watched them with an expression that no human face had the architecture to hold. It was not hunger, though it contained hunger. It was not longing, though longing moved through it like a river through stone. It was the look of a being who had existed since before the first morning, and had in all that measureless time never once felt the terror of wanting something he was not supposed to have. Behind him, 200 of his brothers waited. Barakel, who governed the stars, Kokabiel, whose name meant Star of God, Arakiel, who knew the signs of the earth, Asael, whose knowledge of metals would become a curse upon the world. They stood in silence, the silence of those who have made a decision and are waiting for the first word to make it real, because they know that once the word is spoken, it cannot be unspoken, and the word, once loose in the world, becomes a chain. Semjaza turned to face them. I am afraid that you will not hold to this oath when the time comes to answer for it, and I alone will bear the punishment. And Azazel answered for them all, Let us all swear an oath and bind one another by imprecations, not to alter our plan, but to carry it out effectively. They swore, every one of them. They bound themselves with oaths that had the weight of mountains, and when the swearing was done, the night felt heavier, as though the air itself had accepted a new burden. This was how it began, not with thunder, not with war, with 200 beings of light making promises on the crown of a nameless mountain, looking down at the small warm lights of humanity, and deciding that they would descend. Adanil had been betrothed since she was 12 years old in the way of her people, the way of her mother's people and her mother's mother's people, going back to the first woman who had ever stood before a man and received the weight of his future pressed into her hands like a stone. The man chosen for her was Hodiah, a farmer of some standing in the valley of Mahani Ida, a man of perhaps 30 years, who had broad shoulders and kind eyes, and who looked at her the way a man looks at something he has worked very hard to earn, not with love, with satisfaction. Marriage in the time before the Nephilim followed the rhythms of the land and the logic of survival. A woman's body was a form of wealth. Her fertility was a resource. Her obedience was a virtue because it was useful. In a world where the wrong harvest could kill a settlement, every element of order mattered. You married the man your father chose. You kept his household. You bore his children. You ground the grain and kept the fire and wrapped the dead. This was the architecture of life. It was not beautiful, but it held. The village elders performed betrothals with ceremonies accumulated over generations. The exchange of grain, the binding of hands with cord, the recitation of words so old their original meaning had been worn smooth by repetition. Hodiah's family brought gifts, oil, linen, a copper vessel. Her father received them with the gravity appropriate to a transaction of this magnitude. Adanel watched her own betrothal from a curious internal distance, observing it from slightly outside her own body. She noticed the way the lamplight fell on the copper vessel. She noticed a spider crossing the floor near the doorway. She thought, this is my life now. This is what it looks like. She had no premonition of what was coming. Only afterward, she would remember that the stars had seemed very bright that night. Semjaza found Adanel in the month when the harvest was being brought in. She was carrying water from the stream, 2 heavy clay jars on a pole across her shoulders, walking with the efficiency of a woman who has done this thousands of times. He appeared at the edge of the tree line, and she stopped walking. The jars swung, water sloshed. A bird sang a single note and stopped. She had heard the stories by then. Every woman had. And so when she looked at him, at the light that seemed to move beneath his skin the way fire moves beneath thin paper, at the eyes that belonged to a different category than the merely strange, she knew what she was looking at. She should have run. She stood still instead. I know what you are, she said, because she was not the kind of woman who waited for others to name the nature of things. Yes, he said. His voice was like hearing two sounds at once, a high harmonic and a low one. And I know what you are. I am betrothed, she said. I know. What you're asking, she began and stopped. I am not asking, Semjaza said, and the terrible thing was that he said this without cruelty, with the flat honesty of someone describing a natural law. Water runs downhill, fire rises. He was not asking. What happened next to Adonel and to hundreds of women chosen by the Watchers was not marriage in any sense the word had previously contained, but the Watchers called it marriage. They permitted the human communities to perform ceremonies, standing before terrified elders, with their impossible luminescence barely contained, while fathers spoke the old words and bound hands with cord and tried to behave as though a customary transaction were occurring, as though the gifts being offered, knowledge, protection, the terrifying favor of beings who could call lightning, were simply a different kind of copper vessel. This was the first corruption, the form of marriage without the substance of it. The cord still bound, the words were still spoken, but what was being enacted was not a covenant between equals, it was a possession dressed in the costume of union. Hodiah came to Adonel's father 7 days after Semjaza had come to her in the field. He sat and drank water and looked at the middle distance for a long time. Her father sat across from him and also looked at the middle distance. The betrothal, Hodiah said finally. Yes, said her father. The cord was not burned, Hodiah said, which was the formal way of saying the betrothal had not been officially dissolved. No. Then technically, he began. Yes, said her father, technically. But they both knew that technically was not a territory where either of them had any power, and after a while Hodiah left, and Adonel's father sat alone staring at the dead fire and did not call for light. Azazel came down from Ardis carrying knowledge the way a wound carries infection, deep, invisible at first, spreading in ways that could not be tracked until the damage was done. He taught men to make swords and shields and breastplates, turning human conflict into something with an industrial logic, something that could scale. To the women he brought different knowledge, the art of adornment, the use of antimony for the eyes, the fashioning of ornaments, enhancements of beauty that were also enhancements of appetite. This was the second corruption, knowledge as transaction. What the Watchers gave created dependency, obligation, a reorientation of human life toward needs that had not existed before the descent. The marriages between Watchers and human women were the central node of a web of dependencies extending through the entire fabric of society. The women who had been taken became involuntary intermediaries, conduits between worlds, carrying knowledge and obligation in both directions, belonging fully to neither. Adonel understood this. Semjaza had wanted her specifically, not only her fertility, not only her youth, but her clarity of mind, her habit of naming things accurately. He had wanted a mind that could hold his. This was cold comfort in the long nights of the high dwelling, when the light inside was the wrong color and cast no shadow. Tell me, he said to her once in the deep watches of a winter night, what you were before I came. I was betrothed, she said, before that. I was a daughter. Before that. I was myself, she said, just myself, without title. He was quiet for a long time. I have existed since before the first morning of the world, he said finally. And in all that time there was nothing I did not already possess, in some sense. The architecture of heaven is complete. There is no lack in it. Then why? She asked. The silence this time was the silence of the abyss. Because you are temporary, he said quietly. Your body, your breath, the particular way you are yourself. You will exist for the length of a morning in my accounting, and then you will be gone. And there will never again be precisely this arrangement of matter and consciousness that is Adonel. And something about that. His voice was doing something she had no word for. Something about that was unbearable to me. She lay still and looked at the ceiling. You destroyed my life, she said, because you were afraid of impermanence. He did not answer, which was its own kind of answer. The children came. Large, that first, before anything else. Large in a way that cost their mothers enormously, that killed some of them, that left survivors marked in ways that didn't show on the outside. They grew too fast, always ahead of where they should be. Beautiful, many of them, in the way the Watchers were beautiful, that slightly wrong beauty that makes you want to look and also makes you want to look away. Their eyes contained human things and also other things, things for which human faces had not developed the corresponding vocabulary. Adonel's son was called Mahaz. She held him after his birth with the exhaustion and alertness that follows labor, looking at this impossible hybrid of the celestial and the human, thinking, "What have I done to the world by being in it?" He had her nose, he had Semjaza's eyes. He grew the way Nephilim grew. By the time he was 5, he stood taller than most men of the settlement. He came to her once, in his 7th year, folding himself down to fit the human scale of the doorway, with the face of a child and the body of a young man. "Why do the other children run from me?" She thought about what she would have wanted to hear at his age, asking a question with no good answer. "Because you are the first," she said. "And people have not yet learned how to understand the first of anything. Will they learn?" She looked at his wrong, deep eyes, her eyes, and not her eyes. She thought about the world as she understood it, the growing number of Nephilim, the growing whisper of something vast and offended moving in the heavens. "I don't know," she said, because he deserved honesty. Enoch walked between worlds. He came to the Watchers when the weight of what they had done was already pressing down on everything, when the Nephilim were grown and multiplying, and the knowledge of war had done its work. The Watchers had sent him to God as an intercessor, dictating to him a petition for forgiveness, for some mercy from the heaven they had abandoned. He returned with the answer of God. "You were in heaven, and no secret was hidden from you. You knew. You chose the forbidden with open eyes, and now you ask the sons of men to intercede for you. You, the holy and eternal ones, asking pardon from those whose life is brief. You brought corruption upon the daughters of men, and behaved as the children of earth, and begot upon them giants. Your wives were made for the sons of earth, not for you. Upon the earth you shall never obtain peace or forgiveness." The Watchers heard this in the silence of Ardis, 200 of them, and the silence was very different from the silence that had preceded their oath. That silence had been the silence of choice not yet made. This was the silence of consequence, of the door closed, of actions whose full weight only arrives in the moment of their accounting. Semjaza did not speak. He looked at the valley below. More lights now, brighter, fueled by the knowledge his brothers had given, and he thought about Adonel, about the thing he had told her in the winter night, about impermanence. He thought about how the things you choose for reasons that feel like love are also sometimes the things that destroy the world, and the two facts sit side by side without resolving. Adonel sat in her doorway in the last year before the waters came, watching Mahaz walk up the path from the valley, and she thought about marriage, about the cord and the oil and the copper vessel, about Hodiah and his dry hands, about the spider crossing the floor on the night of her betrothal, that small ordinary creature on the ordinary ground of her ordinary life, which had been the last ordinary moment before the extraordinary arrived and changed everything. Marriage, she thought, is a word for the thing that binds. It does not specify the nature of the binding. It does not specify whether the bond serves the bound or the one who binds, whether what is created is life or something that only resembles life the way the Watcher's light resembles firelight, in color and in warmth, but not in origin. The waters were coming. She could smell them now, a heaviness that had nothing to do with weather. Mahaz sat beside her, too large for the doorway, and they watched the valley together in the last of the light. "What will happen to us?" he asked. She put her hand in his, her small human hand in his hand that was both hers and not hers, and felt in the texture of it everything that had been and everything that was ending. "I don't know," she said, meaning it differently than all the other times. The first star appeared above the mountain. Somewhere in the high places, a sound began below hearing, a vibration more felt than heard, the sound of the universe clearing its throat before the sentence. The waters rose to meet the stars, and the marriages of the age of the Nephilim passed out of the living world and into the deep grammar of myth, where they have lived ever since, too true to be forgotten, too strange to be fully spoken, echoing forward through all the generations of the earth, in the shape of the absence they left behind.